So today we're going to talk about texture. Now, as you can imagine, with all of these lessons, we could go on for hours and hours and hours. So we're just going to keep it a little more condensed. And we're going to talk about texture, but more specifically, we're going to talk about fur. So texture is basically the way something looks like it feels. Is that? Yeah, that's right. How it looks like it feels. It's a little bit of a head game, but like imagine like this it looks dirty, but it also looks smooth. Whereas this, well, is dirty, but it is also hairy. Okay, I think once we get started, maybe you'll have a better idea. What we're going to use for this lesson is some watercolors. I like praying, but use what you have. We're also going to use some white acrylic paint, although I see the lid's not on. It might be all dried up. You're going to need some water. We're also going to use, and a paintbrush, one that is good for watercolor and one that is good for acrylic. Although if you clean them out good in between, there's no reason they can't be the same paintbrush. There's a little bit of something flying around. The other things we're going to use, I still have my ultrafine Sharpie. I have a G-2 pen. Now, the reason why I have this one as opposed to the ballpoint pen that I used up earlier, I like G2 because it's water soluble. What that means is it moves around when it gets wet, as opposed to a Sharpie that once it's down there, if you put water on it, it doesn't move. The ink won't smudge. And then finally, I have just a regular pencil with an eraser or an eraser, whatever you want. So, and I do have a paper towel just to blot my paintbrush on so I can control how much water is getting everywhere. Now, here's the other specialty item we have. When we start using water media, you need something sturdier than copy paper or sketchbook paper. Even cardstock, you could try it, you just can't get too wet. Otherwise it buckles and it starts to kind of bead, tear the paper a little bit. So if you can access some heavy duty watercolor paper, that's really gonna help you out with this project quite a bit. This is just whatever kind of watercolor paper they had at the local craft store, but I'm sure you can find it just about anywhere. All right. Let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is practice my different tools and see what kind of textures they make. Then I'm going to combine them all and layer them and really see how building up those textures makes our fur feel furry. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to start with a pencil, just a basic pencil. Now I'm going to work on just the corner, this side of my paper, and I'm going to work in real small swatches, they're called, just little kind of tidbits so I can get the feel of what they're going to look like. So I'm going to start with just kind of sketching and scribbling. Even that already kind of has the feel of fur. We could start adding some values, some darker and lighter tones. That can really make it feel like fur is layered over top of fur. Now, with our eraser, we can not necessarily erase it, but we can start to lighten and smudge around and pull these pencil marks around, or even make lighter streaks in our texture of our fur. Sort of pull it down. So if you'll notice, I am not necessarily making those pencil marks going away. I'm just kind of smudging them, smearing them, and trying to create a little more depth in there. If I erase too much, guess what I can do? Because I'm the boss of this piece of paper. I do what I want. So take a minute and see what your pencil can do. Now let's move on to the next tool, the G2, the G2. So this water-soluble pen, and I discovered its water solubility. I don't think that's a word by accident. But whatever, you can get this at most stores, most marts, most office supply store. If you pilfer around in a drawer long enough, I bet you'll come across one. The fun thing about this as opposed to paints is that even though it's water soluble, you can still see evidence of the line. So I can make all these little marks, and some will be wispy, some will be short and overlapped. But I'm just kind of making a bunch of different little hairs, because that's what makes up fur anyway, isn't it? A bunch of little hairs. And now let's see what happens when we add a little water to the situation. So you don't want to add too much water. After you wet your paintbrush, you can blot it on a paper towel just so you can control how much water gets in here. All right. Ooh, see, look at that. Now, I can just blend it with water, or I can use the same type of marks and kind of reinforce this idea that I did with the pen in the first place. So I'm basically drawing wispy marks, kind of letting it skim over the surface. So you can still see that line underneath. It's not making it go away. Which, you know, it's not good or bad. It's just, you know, that's what it is. So use it how you like. Another way you could kind of abstract fur, and you can just make a repeated pattern of little dashes for maybe a different kind of sparsely furred creature. Those almost look more like whiskers. Now let's pull out our watercolors. I'm not going to worry too much about color. As a matter of fact, I'll probably just stick with some brown. Although if you want to mix your watercolors, you can do that in this tray up here. So I'm just going to get a little brown. Now this is the first time we've used watercolors in these lessons. I'm guessing most of you have a little experience, but for those of you who don't, if you want a lighter color, more water. The less water, the more pigment. So let's see what kinds of marks we can make to feel like fur. I'm just wisping. I'm just barely touching my paintbrush to the paper. All right. What if we move it up in here? Oh. So those are our swatches. Now, if I want this darker, this brown, I would use straight pigment, straight out of the pan. So I don't have a lot of water on my brush. I cleaned it and I dried it with my paper towel. Now look how much darker that is. Now, if I want it lighter, I can pick up some water and mix it, and it gets quite a bit lighter. So that's what I mean. If we're talking about lightness and darkness, or value isn't just between dark and light like pencils and pens. Each color has a light and dark to it too. Okay, but that's a different segment. Now let's see what happens when we pull this all together and let's make a bunny. What do you say? I'm gonna get my pencil out so I can just sketch the shape of my bunny. And I'm gonna do a real simplified shape because I really wanna focus on the fur and exploring that. So the first thing I'm gonna do, maybe I start with the ears. Nice tall bunny ears. And then we have a head, a little bunny cheeks, bunny face. And then just a little bunny body. Bunny body. Now, their eyes. Pretty close to the side of their head. Got a little nose here. A little mouth. Okay. So let's have fun building up these textures and see what happens when we combine all of this. All right, let's start with the fur, the pencil. I'm gonna use the same kind of motion that I used back here. I think on their face they have like shorter hairs. So sometimes people can feel frustrated because their artwork doesn't look good right away. That's okay. First of all, yeah, you can be frustrated, that's all right. But sometimes it doesn't look good right away because it's not done. So let's just stick with it and see what happens. And the good news about this, if it doesn't look good right away, you got nothing to lose when we do the next thing. You can do as much experimenting as you want because you already don't like it. Okay, so I have my wispy fur texture. Now I'm gonna take my eraser and kind of see what happens when I kind of smudge it around a little bit. What does that do to my texture? Makes it kind of cool, makes some parts soft and some parts less soft, for lack of a better word. Now, one thing that I'm noticing as I'm looking at this is the same value as this, which means they're all in the same plane of space. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself because we're going to talk about space and form later, but I'm going to make under his or her chin a little bit darker so that the neck moves forward, or the neck moves back and the head moves forward. But we'll see. Who knows? Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. I'm going to now go in with my Pilot G2, the G2, and I'm going to do the same thing. Now, if you remember from our value lesson, where there's less paper shining through, it will be darker. So maybe right up here under this chin, I will have it be a little bit darker by having more marks closer together, as opposed to down here. Maybe I have less marks. See how much more white space is showing through? Same with up here. I would imagine that kind of right by where the ears meet the head might be a little darker. And so I'll make sure that my marks that I'm making are closer together. Now, I don't want a white outline between the neck and the head, so I'm going to make sure there's overlap. These little wispy marks are overlapping the neck marks that I made. Let's see what happens with the little paintbrush. Now, I'm going to blot it on some paper towel so I'm not introducing more water than I'm prepared for. But here's another thing. As my water and paintbrush pick up the ink, it's going to start spreading that ink around. So if I notice I'm getting too much ink on here, I'll rinse my brush. That's kind of fun. I'm going to rinse the ink off my paintbrush. See here, it's going to start to bring that up into that center ear, which is fine, but I like to have a little bit more value change. I'd like it to be lighter in that ear. So the pen that it picked up, I'm going to rinse off. I think we should let this dry before we go in with our watercolors. So let it dry or dry it with a hairdryer. All right, nice and dry. Let's see what happens when we add wet media. Now, if I'm being honest, I don't know, is this G2 going to mix with my paint? Maybe. It's okay. The way I sleep at night is I always have white paint to cover up anything I'm not happy with, right? Okay, let's get some of this brown paint and see what happens. And we can do the same thing. Oh, isn't that's starting to look like a rabbit. I don't want it so dark brown that I can't see my other layers through. Oh, maybe I do. Let's get up in those ears. That is sure getting a lot of buildup of texture, but we're not done yet. Now we're going to use some white paint and see what happens when we scrape through. So I'm going to dry this one more time. I'm going to pull out my white paint. I got some paint open. It's not the same paint, but it is still a student grade white acrylic paint. You could also use craft paint, a white acrylic craft paint. Anyway, we're going to paint over our bunny and then we're going to scrape into the surface to create another layer of texture. Now, I have a toothpick that I can scrape into it with, or you could use the back end of a floss pick if that's what you have around. I have a paintbrush. I'm just going to moisten it so I don't get too much water in there. And then let's see what happens with our bun. I mean, I'm not going to paint all of it. I want us to be able to scrape into this before it dries. Oh, there we go. Look at that. Except I want to use this. Oops. Paint. Let's go like this. Oh, look at those nice little furs. So he's kind of white. I'm sort of scraping into him. And where I'm scraping is revealing all the other textures down below. Oh, see, I went too far and the paint has dried before I got to my scraping. So note to self and note to you guys, just do a little bit. Don't do more than you can scrape into. Even through the white paint there, I can see those brown and black tinges. I gotta go fast though. I painted a big area. I think I can do it. I think his fur is a little longer down here anyway. Ooh, what about his ears? I'm gonna switch to a skinnier brush. That's some pretty furry texture there. And what about those eyes? They're not furry. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna practice making another texture. Now, if something is smooth and glassy, it wouldn't have these soft, fuzzy edges. It would have pretty crisp, hard edges. So with my watercolor and with my thinner paintbrush, I'm gonna get some black paint. And I'm not gonna mix a lot of water in here because I want it to be dark. So let's put his eye in there. And it's really just this shape. It's more round on the outside. It's not a circle. Rabbits have their eyes on the side of their head. So that's how I'm gonna make this guy. Although I'm sure whatever you do will be adorbs. Oh my gourds. Okay, let's get a little bunny nose in there now. It's just a little mark, just like a little dash with a little rectangle underneath. And we can even get a little bit of his, it's just this shape. Right down the center, and a little bit of a, and there we have the cutest bunny that ever lived. Except there's one more thing. To make his eyes really come to life, animal eyes often have just a little bit of reflection in it. So let's get just a teeny touch of white acrylic paint. And what happens if we just stick a little light mark in there? Aww. Oh, I wish I hadn't done that. Oh well. There we go. Have fun exploring furry texture. Enjoy.